All right, we're ready to kick it off.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm coming to you today. This is Chris from my truck, and I'm just mobile and remote today. So, um, anyhow, I just want to invite you into my truck for a few minutes and let's talk about finance stuff. I had a loan this week come somewhat unglued at the last minute. And if the agents involved were more proactive, um, and of course this was really hard to detect, but um I guess I don't want to say they weren't proactive. um I want to say that I want to be more intentional about educating the agents I work with so that they could have possibly caught or helped us catch this situation earlier on. So here's the scenario. So the home that was purchased was being purchased through a VA home loan. And the home is in a very well developed, highly populated, just regular neighborhood area in the Wichita market. And so every home in this neighborhood is tapped into city water, except for this house. It is on well water still. And so the drinking water is plugged into the well. And with a VA or rural development loan, it's these two loans that you need to be on the lookout for. If the buyer is using a VA home loan or they are using rural development for the loan, and the drinking water is tapped into a well, then we have to take water tests that VA and rural development require in order to insure those home loans. So in the case of this property, no one even knew that there was that the drinking water was connected to the well because it was in such a well-established neighborhood. And even the home buyers called the city to connect water. That's how clueless or oblivious everyone was to this issue. And we didn't find out until the day of closing. And the only way for a lender to find out that there is a well connected to the drinking water of the property is to get the appraisal back. And normally we would have had an appraisal back a couple weeks before closing. But this was a VA home loan, and VA operates on their own time and dime. And so they turned in the appraisal 2 days before closing. And the underwriter did not make the final pass at all of the final documentation until everything was in on the morning of closing day. So that's when we discovered, holy cow, we have to go get a water test and have a laboratory run the water testing and deliver a report back to us so that our VA underwriter could sign off on it. So that's my trick of the trade or finance hack for the day. How about that? This is a finance hack. If you have a buyer that is getting a VA home loan or a rural development home loan, be asking yourself at the time of contract, is there a well on this property? And if the answer is yes, then the next question you need to ask is the well only for irrigation purposes, or is the well tapped into the drinking water within the home? If there is a well on the property and it is only used for irrigation purposes for watering the lawn, we don't care. VA doesn't care, neither does rural development. It's only if the well supplies water for drinking purposes and interior usage within the home. So ask those two questions and do everything you can to proactively get the answer to both of those questions, and then let the lender who is involved with the transaction know right up front at the time of contract, or as close within that date as you can possibly get, so that they have plenty of time to tackle this.
So many of our agents will already know this, but in case somebody's watching and they haven't dealt with this before, just haven't looked at it in a while. When you go onto MLS, it asks for the utilities. So it's going to ask if it's septic and if it's well water, or if it's public drinking water. It should say on the MLS. But then the other thing is double check it with what the sellers have filled out for their disclosure, because I would love to find out what address that was and see if that was found like way ahead of time, because that just doesn't make sense that that's some big shocker. I mean, I guess if the owners were deceased or something like that, maybe, but it just seems interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just went undetected. And in fact, we looked at the paperwork that we had all along the way, and there was just nothing there really that we can see on the front end to detect that, other than the appraisal. And in this case, it would have been fine had the appraisal come in earlier or within a normal time, but this was a late appraisal.
So sometimes when I've worked with like your underwriters, they'll request a copy of the seller's disclosure. Why is there a rhyme or reason, like when they request those or when they don't?
I don't know. That's a really good question that I need to check on and find out.
Because if they're requesting that, they could have seen, and there was a disclosure on that specific property, then, it could have been caught sooner as well.
Where would that be, Leslie? What paperwork?
On the seller's property disclosure?
Like the PCR?
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
So
I'm going to look.
I did have an underwriter ask me for a PCR on a deal that I have right now. And she said that she needed it because there was items on the property disclosure that were not on the contract that they needed to put into the underwriting because of the type of loan it was. So I don't know if that's part of it, or if those two things don't match up or whatever.
Yeah, that's good feedback for me to look into a little bit deeper as well.
So you guys that are watching this, if you don't know what a PCR is, it's a property condition report. That's the old school way, the ones of us that have been doing this forever, Chris and I, and Kelly's just been around me long enough that that's kind of what she calls it. But a lot of the newer agents are just calling it an SD or a seller's disclosure. They don't even call it the property condition report anymore. They've changed the terms on the tops of the page. So anyway, that is where you'll find it. And I know there's a lot of things on there that you'll want to check because the agent might have put it incorrect on MLS, and the seller and that disclosure that they filled out is basically the override for every bit of anything that's going to be disclosed. So Jared was looking at one the other day that was a mobile home, and they put on there that it would go FHA, conventional, and VA on the disclosure or on MLS. And then when we go to look at the disclosure, it's not on a permanent foundation. So we all know that those aren't going to get financed. So you have to be looking at those disclosures to make sure. But this is, something else good to know, to be looking for if you have those that VA or that rural development financing. It's interesting that they don't do it on FHA.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Because FHA is a government loan.
With all of it being,
Yep. Nope. It's just the VA and rural development. They're more, that's a part of their risk analysis. They want to make sure there's no water contamination or high levels of bacteria or anything like that. The other thing to keep in mind, and you might add, this may differ from lender to lender, but we will not allow anyone involved with the transaction to do the water report. So in this case, we had to have the city of Wichita do the water report, because that again is a risk. It's a risk thing, because if the people involved with the transaction are the ones taking the water test, then as far as the VA is concerned, that can be manipulated.
Absolutely. I'm
So,
thinking back on some stuff that I've done in the past, and yeah, we had to have things inspected, and we just put it in a bag and we would take it and drop it off at a location. I think they were in Andover, if I remember right. That's been a long time ago. But yeah, they could have easily been manipulated.
mhm,
You know, and if that does come back, you know, high nitrates or things like that in the water sample, usually it's not a difficult thing to fix. A lot of times you just have to shock the well, or you can put in a reverse osmosis system underneath the sink. So don't freak out if that happens as well. It's just
yep,
it's just one more hoop that you'll jump through.
yep. And if we've got 2 weeks to spare or more before closing to deal with these issues, then we can easily deal with them along the way within the process and not create any time delays. So,
So for our agents that are watching this is something to me that needs to be done during your inspection timeline. Because if you do have to request that they fix something for it, I mean, I guess it could be construed as um, an appraisal requirement or a lending requirement, but I would just cover all your, you know, bases and get it done during that due diligence / inspection timeframe. So if you're doing those anyway in the first or second week, then it'll give you plenty of time to get somebody scheduled if you have to get it fixed.
yep, yep. Also, another closely related issue is lagoons. If a property has a lagoon and it's a government loan, there are additional stipulations and inspections that have to occur on that lagoon. And if it's not properly fenced or
Cleaned
in
out.
working order, and then those may be additional requirements that the lender has to impose because the financing is a government based or or sponsored entity such as VA or rural development
So what
or
about
FHA.
septic?
Same thing. Septic
Okay.
system has, yeah. So just be on the lookout for wells, lagoons, septic systems. And if that is in play on a property, then be thinking and asking yourself, what kind of loan is this lender doing for my buyer? And if it's a government loan, be having have a conversation with the lender or me, if I'm the lender, and talk through that at the time of contract so that you get any of those red flags addressed right up front. And that way you have plenty of time to address them along the way.
If you're out showing
To
rural
closing.
properties, these are things that are definitely going to be coming up. I mean, it's not something that typically you see in Wichita city limits, but there are still a few areas that are that way. I know like Orchard Park, there still used to be several of those over kind of at Central and 235. They would be hooked up to, they weren't on city water. Where was that one at,
Mhm.
Chris? Do you remember?
West
The one-
Wichita. Yeah. West Wichita in a
Yeah.
very well-established neighborhood that's been around for a good while.
Probably since the 50s, and they just never connected.
Right.
Yeah.
They probably had the option to do that. I mean, even some of the rural ones, you can have the option to do it, but people just didn't want to spend the money and get them converted. And I've heard that the water pressure from Wichita is a stronger pressure than the rural stuff. So a lot of times if you have a seller and this is coming up and they want, instead of having the reverse osmosis or something, and the sellers are requesting for it to be connected, that's something you're going to want to think about, because I've heard that there's leaks and things like that in the rest of the plumbing because of the different pressure, and it wasn't used to those, that higher pressure from the city. I haven't had that,
Right.
but I've heard that.
Right.
So,
Yep. That's exactly right. So I thought that would be a good finance hack for our Thursday call here.
Yep.
Just be
That's-
proactive, be a detective, figure this stuff out and then relate it to the financing just ask the right questions and make the connections, because you the agent might be the one that saves the whole flipping, a future mess in finance
Mhm.
and delayed closing, just because you proactively, asked these questions and addressed them right up front with the lender involved. So,
And regardless of lending, even if you have a buyer and they're getting a conventional loan, I would still highly recommend that they test the water. If they're on a well for drinking water.
Yeah,
So.
that's right. Not a bad idea, regardless.
All right.
So
Sounds
that's
good.
all I got for the day. Is that a good nugget for the day? You
Yeah,
think?
that's a great nugget. I mean, it's
That-
always a
that one
refresher
was a-
for me.
That one was an anomaly, and these problems don't happen as much for me these days. I mean, I don't think I've had this issue pop up out of nowhere, on closing day like this, probably for over 5 years. That's
Yeah.
probably the last time I can remember. So it's not as common, but if you put that in your subconscious, then it'll just help to overcome the 1 in a million times that it happens.
Right.
So
That sounds good. I'm glad we know it now. We'll be looking for it.
awesome.
All right.
All right, you
Thanks for your
guys.
time, Chris.
Yep. Thanks. We'll see you.
Bye.